Health insurance premium set to jump by the biggest amount in 7 years. Trudy McIntosh is live in the studio and just ahead of the election this is announced.
Yeah, it's not good news for anyone with health insurance, Kieran, but the government is arguing it could have been worse if they didn't ask the health insurers to go back to the drawing board. The average increase for premiums from April 1 is 3.7%, but things do vary quite substantially depending on the health insurance provider. The health minister officially has to tick off on these increases. It's taken lengthy negotiations to land on today's figures that have now been released ahead of April. Have a look at the different providers here. You can see for Bupa, it's a 5.1% increase. For HBF, 2.8%, Medibank 4% and NIB 5.8%. Health insurance providers argue that this is the lowest they could have gone with the increases as a result of healthcare inflation.
This was an extremely tough decision for the health insurance funds and their federal regulators to make. What the increase is being driven by is inflation. Health sector inflation is running at 4%, which is actually higher than the increase. And there was an 8% increase in payments to hospitals last year by the health insurance funds. So this is as low as we can go and still be able to pay our hospitals properly.
With the federal election just around the corner, there is plenty of politics related to today's announcement. The opposition will point out that this is the biggest increase we've seen in health insurance premiums in 7 years. But Labor's reply is it was bigger when opposition leader Peter Dutton was the then health minister. Have a look at how premiums have been rising over the last decade or so. You could see the peak there in 2014. It's come down in terms of that increase per year. Lowest we saw was in the pandemic, and now it's steadily back up on the increase under the Labor government. This is some of the reaction we've seen this morning.
Mark Butler has worked very hard at getting this down as low as possible. It's much lower than the private health insurers asked for. And the approach that he's brought here to work hard to get this down is in stark contrast to Peter Dutton when he was health minister, who approved a 6.2% increase just before Christmas Eve.
And Trudy, the opposition accusing the Prime Minister of misleading the Australian public over the China naval drills.
Yeah, a big accusation made by opposition leader Peter Dutton this morning, accusing their Prime Minister of misleading the Australian public over how much notice China provided to this country before it conducted live fire exercise off our coast. Now, it's been made clear today that there was no direct warning that China gave to Australia that this was about to take place. Instead, it was that Virgin pilot who heard the alert that then passed the information on to Air Services Australia. That then came back to Defence in Canberra. Separately, the New Zealand Navy, monitoring what was happening off our coast, realised something was going on, but it took longer than the Virgin pilot for that detail to also make its way back here to Canberra. The politics, though, centres on comments the Prime Minister made last week, where he seemed to imply that notice had been given. It's been made clear that that didn't come directly from China. This is the opposition leader this morning.
Well, and that he's misled the Australian people. This is a very serious claim to be made against a Prime Minister, but he is at odds with the sworn testimony of the Chief of the Defence Force.
Things are getting pretty heated this morning in Senate estimates. This has all blown up in the last 24 hours because Defence had coincidentally been before Senate estimates. So the Chief of the Defence Force was able to outline the timeline of when Australia was notified and by who. Today, James Paterson going head-to-head with the Foreign Minister Penny Wong on this issue of the notice being provided. It's been made clear that China didn't tell us in advance. James Paterson trying to get Penny Wong to say that what Anthony Albanese had said was wrong.
So we were provided advance notice?
Both statements are correct.
It is not the same thing to say we received notice and there was no advance notice provided, which is what you have said, compared to what the Prime Minister has said.
So it is correct that China gave notice. We have issues with the timeframe around that and the channel, and we have expressed that to them.
How did they give notice if we only learned the exercises after they had commenced?